Good morning, Bear Creek. Hope you're doing well today. Hope this week has been a good one for you as you have been joining us with these Easter readings, these Holy Week readings. Today is Maundy Thursday. It is the beginning of the Passion Weekend. The events leading up to Jesus' arrest begin today. The Last Supper is today. His arrest is tonight, and I encourage you, whether you're watching this video in the morning or in the evening, maybe tonight before you go to bed, you come back to Mark's Gospel and you read the events again as these happened mostly in the evening. Today's events take place in Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 12, and it goes all the way to the end of the chapter, which is at the end of verse 72. I'm not going to read all of that for you today, but I encourage you to read it on your own with your family. It's a good passage of Scripture for us to understand. Very important events, very important things happen on Maundy Thursday. First, you see in verses 12 through 21, Jesus predicting and telling his disciples that one of them will betray him. It's someone who's dipping his hand into the same bowl, sharing a table with Jesus, who would be betrayed. And then he institutes the Lord's Supper. And this is significant for a number of reasons. This is the time of the Passover, where all of Jerusalem, the entire city, is celebrating and remembering the events of the book of Exodus, when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt by the hand of God. And the Passover represents the 10th and final plague, where the angel of death came into Egypt and killed all of the firstborn sons, except for those that had killed the lamb in the son's place and covered their doorframe with the lamb's blood. And so typically when the city would celebrate the Passover, they would, at this point in time, they would gather in their homes as family and loved ones, and they'd sit around this meal. And the meal had several different parts and several different phases, so to speak. And someone, normally the head of the household, would lead this discussion. And as they partook of each part of the meal, they would lead and say, this piece of bread or this cup or this animal represents what, and they would remind and just walk through the steps of what God had done for their ancestors in Egypt. But in Mark 14 verse 22, things change. Jesus sort of goes off script, and what many refer to as his Last Supper. But we who still partake of this supper actually know it as sort of the First Supper, the institution of a new covenant. Look with me at Mark chapter 14, verse 22. As they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they drank all of it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day, when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Even though they all fall away, I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, "If I must die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said the same. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." So a few things that to point out here as we read this passage. In the Lord's Supper, he institutes and points them to a greater Passover. The first Passover in Exodus was actually just a shadow, something that pointed ahead to an even greater salvation. That a lamb would not be killed to save only the sons of Egypt, the firstborn sons of Israel, rather. But in fact, God's own Son would die so that all of mankind could be spared. Excuse me. And so when he takes the lamb, he takes the bread that represented the sacrifice, he breaks it and said, this is not a lamb that was sacrificed for your ancestors. This is my body that is sacrificed, that is broken for you. And then he takes the cup and he passes it around and he says, and this cup represents the blood that will be shed, my blood that will be poured out. And he gives the purpose. It is poured out for many. And in the other gospel accounts, we see that Jesus says that this is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. And the fact that it is Jesus' blood, it is God's own blood that is poured out, accomplishes forgiveness for all who trust, for all who believe. Is a good thing for us to celebrate every year, as we typically have a Maundy Thursday service together. This year's different, and it might be painful for you not to be with us taking communion together. It's difficult, but these words, these truths are no less true. We remind ourselves tonight, we remind ourselves today of the sacrifice that was made, of the new covenant that was instituted on this day. Immediately following the supper, they sing a hymn together and they go out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus kindly and graciously and gently tells his disciples, look, things are about to get really bad and you're all going to leave me. I'm going to go through this alone without even you by my side. And Peter is sort of this leader of the group and very very boisterous, very kind of puts the cart before the horse and speaks out of turn, says, never. I will never deny you, Jesus. And what takes place in this scene is not some exuberant faith on Peter's part. He's actually, because when you think about it, he's telling Jesus that he's a liar. What's happening with Peter, and then as the disciples join in with Peter's claims, is they're putting way too much confidence in themselves. Jesus is gently reminding them that they are weak, that they will fail, that they will deny Jesus and run away and hide to save themselves. Because at the end of the day, their number one concern is themselves. And as much as we would like to think that, if we were in that position, we would have never denied Jesus. I would not do what Peter and the disciples did. We would have been strong. We would have been faithful. We would have been true. And again, we are putting way too much confidence in ourselves, because if those words are true, if we would have never denied Jesus, then the fact of the matter is that Jesus would have had to die. Jesus died because of our weakness and our inability to obey. He died because of our sin. And this denial of our weakness is simply just a denial of the fact that Jesus had to die. And so I encourage you, don't put this confidence, don't put this overconfidence in yourself. When you're tempted to do this, our response should not be like Peter and the disciples. When Jesus comes to us and says, look, you're broken, you're weak, you're going to fail, our response should be, it should not be never. It should be, Lord, forgive me, because I know this is true. And then immediately after this event, Jesus goes into Gethsemane. He goes into an olive garden. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this scene. He goes and he prays, and his prayer is, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. Now, Jesus begins to consider what lays ahead of him. And he is distressed. And I firmly believe it is not the painful death, the crucifixion, the suffocation, the beating, the crown of thorns, none of this is what has Jesus concerned. I don't believe Jesus is afraid to die. We've seen in church history how many other martyrs have faced their death with such boldness and joy and just almost a happiness to suffer for the cause of Christ. And if Jesus were afraid of death, then he would have done what they did better. No, what Jesus was facing was much different than just death. Jesus was staring into the depths of the wrath of God. He was staring into the abyss. He was staring into darkness. He was staring into separation from the Father. And it distressed him. It made him weep. It made him weak. It made him stagger. But in this moment, we see two things: a dependence on God, a dependence on who He is trusting and believing. We see again why He had to die. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, when Adam took the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he was boldly proclaiming to God, "Not your will, but my will be done." And now in this second garden, in Gethsemane, we have a second Adam who is saying, "Not my will, but your will be done." It is a submission to the Father. It is a submission, a laying down of his fears, a laying down of what is waiting, a willingness to take what is coming so that he can honor the will of the Father in holy and reverent submission. There's a beautiful truth here that is taking place. As the events unfold, as things are unpacking, Jesus leaves the garden, and if you look there in verse 41, he comes back to his disciples and he says, "It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Jesus goes into the garden burdened, distressed. The burden is not alleviated. The cup is not removed from him, but he comes out of the garden ready. Hebrews reminds us, and he says that the author of Hebrews says that for the joy that was set before him, Christ endured the cross, despising its shame, and is now seated at the right hand of God. I believe that in this garden he came out in submitting to the Father. He is reminded and pointed to the joy that is waiting for him on the other side of this cross. And so he endured it. This day marks the beginning of the end of Jesus' life. It marks the beginning of something great that is about to take place. It marks the beginning of the great exchange, where the righteous one, where the Son of God was exchanged for weak, broken sinners like you and me. I pray tonight, as you read these passages tonight, as you're pondering these events. Maybe it's this morning. I'm not sure when you're watching this or reading this, but as you read this passage, ponder the weight of your sin, that it distressed Jesus even to death, to stare into the consequences of your sin. But yet, he submitted to the Father. He took your place. He took my place. And as we will see tomorrow, the cost of his sin, he endured it. He went out and he faced it. I'm praying for you. I will be missing you tonight, as we will not be having our normal Maundy Thursday service, but I pray that you and your family are doing well and are really considering the truths of these passages this week. Love you, Bear Creek, and Lord willing, I will see you soon.